everyone. This is Dr. Seymour with the Optimal Response Initiative. Stay alert, stay alive, and thrive. The training continues. Today, I want to share some insights on the power of music to heal, specifically the healing benefits of music in regard to my own experience with traumatic brain injury, serving in the U.S. military, dealing with profound deafness regarding the diagnosis of my son at 10 months old, and learning how to thrive and find the rhythm of life again throughout all of these experiences. So first, I want to share my experience of waking up stuck in my body in a coma at 7 years old. I remember specifically waking up knowing I was stuck in my body because I remember testing out. I told myself to move my left arm, and I wanted to do this. And I knew that when I was thinking to do that or trying to tell my arm to do that, I knew that nothing happened. So I knew that I was stuck in my body and I was profoundly disconnected with the outside world. And the sound of silence became very, very loud. I did hear muffled sounds and I did recognize voices, but I could not understand what anybody was saying. It was kind of like what you hear underwater times 100. I did recognize, I remember specifically, because when I woke up from the coma, I remember telling my mother that Mary Poppins had visited, which Mary Poppins being Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music. And then I remember watching Mary Poppins when I was little and her voice and singing. So I did recognize her voice. She was at the Children's Hospital in Seattle, visited, did a show for children, and then visited all the children who couldn't attend, myself being one of them because I was in a coma. And I remember hearing her voice and I knew that she had puppets, but I couldn't get to her or the puppets. But I do remember specifically recognizing her voice. So silence was very loud, but there was muffled sounds within the silence. Some I recognized, some I did not. And I did have an unexplainable peace for the first time in my life, and really would have been content to stay there if I could have brought my older brother and best friend into the coma with me, but I knew that my older brother couldn't be brought into a coma inside my body with me, even though I kind of thought that would be nice because it was the first time I'd experienced peace in my entire life, felt secure and safe. I knew that I could go on beyond this world with God, even though I didn't know about God and wasn't taught about God growing up. I grew up in a very rough, violent environment. But in that coma, I had unexplainable peace. I had what I call capital letter knowings, things that I knew all of a sudden that I couldn't have known otherwise. For example, I knew that God wasn't bound by the physical, and I knew I was bound by the physical. And I had this visual of my two uncles had this, I remember watching them. They had this love bug car that had kind of stalled out. Of course, this was, I don't know if I was 5 or 6. It was definitely before 7, because at 7 I was in the coma. And I remember watching them with this stalled out car, and they were going to take it down a hill. One got in the driver's side, the other one pushed it, and then apparently it popped the clutch. And I remember whatever happened. I don't know the terminology with mechanics of cars, but I remember at 5 or 6 years old watching the car kind of jump back to life. And then it, my uncle took off down the road with the car. So when I was stuck in that coma, I had this thought, okay, I need to, and I made a deal with God at 7. I came up with this plan, and I told God that I was going to think and think and think and think and think and think and think really fast. And I was going to do my part to create more and more momentum with my thoughts to try to really connect my mind, my brain and body so that I could wake up and get back to my older brother. So I made a deal with God, or that at 7, I was trying to make a deal with God because I knew I could go on in peace and be with God. But I really, 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 really more than death itself, I wanted, which would have been peaceful, because where my brother and I grew up was not peaceful or safe. But I wanted more than the peace of death to be in life with my brother. I wanted to do life with my brother, we had a deal. We were going to survive our childhood and get a one-way ticket out of there. And best revenge is a great life. And so we were both determined to survive our childhoods and have the beautiful revenge of a wonderful life. And we had each other's back all the time. So I had to get back to my brother. I wanted that more than the peace of death at 7. And so I was making this, coming up with this plan. And so I was thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking. And I asked God to do his part because I knew only he could, to connect my brain and body back so I could wake up and get back to my brother. So I remember this as if it was yesterday. It's very vivid. Everything with all my thoughts and experiences and conversations with God in the coma is really profound. And the way I like to explain it is I received a lot of capital letter knowings, understanding of things that I never had before, and I can't explain. I knew that I had to get back. I knew that God was going to have our backs, and I knew that only God could do it. And so I asked God to do it. I said I would do my part, and I would continue to do my part if I could get back to my brother. And so I did wake up. I remember waking up and half of my head was shaved. And I don't know why, but I had this really long, straight black hair. I remember some kid in school calling me Winnie the Witch, which really hurt my feelings. But when I woke up from this coma, I had one pigtail on the side of my head and the other side was shaved off. And there was a mirror. Why was there a mirror? I don't know. But I started screaming bloody murder because, one, I felt like Frankenstein. And I had this huge dent in my head and it was shaved and I had a pigtail. So I remember my brother telling me to be quiet and stop screaming, and then we would both get some ice cream. So thank God he was there. And we got some ice cream, and I was still mad about half my head being shaved and one pigtail. I mean, geez, put it towards the back like a kind of side ponytail, but just sticking out like that. Good night, Irene, as my great grandmama used to say. Okay, so it was profoundly silent in the coma. The sound of silence was almost deafening in the coma because I couldn't communicate with the outside world, but I did communicate with God. I capital letter knew that God was spiritual and not bound by the physical. I knew that I was bound by the physical, and I needed God, who was not bound by physical or spiritual, to connect my brain and body and get me back to my brother. And I knew these things not having been taught anything of God. I mean, unfortunately, where I grew up, cuss words were used a lot, and I was proud of all the cuss words I would learn. I mean, I know that Sunday is church day, right? But I didn't grow up in church. My grandpa used to take us to the dump on Sunday, and we could throw things into the dump, and every time we did it, we could say whatever cuss word we wanted. And that's what we did on Sunday. And then he would bring us to Dairy Queen and get us ice cream. So that's kind of how, I mean, when we were with our grandparents, we were relatively safe, or a lot safer than other times. And so I grew up in a rough place. My brother was my best friend, is my best friend, was my life, is my life, is my heart. And I really wanted to get back to my brother. But I'm going to kind of string this theme of silence and disconnect, and sound and vibrations and connection throughout this short talk. So I did get back. When I started second grade in Seattle Children's Hospital, the doctor told the teacher not to expect much from me because I was retarded. And I remember thinking specifically, and I said a cuss word, BASTARD. I said, "Watch me, Master," in my mind. I couldn't expressively speak, but I could think, and that's what I thought. And I can still visualize him standing right there saying that to the teacher, and that's the exact thought I had. And that really ingrained in me. I already had a fight in me, but I had a bigger fight in me to not only survive, but thrive. And I needed to relearn everything from speaking to numbers, to letters, to 1 + 1 is 2, all kinds of things. I knew that I knew things before the coma that I didn't know now. And the frustration was at 100 for me because it's like I had recollections of knowing things, but it was like half information and then a whiteboard. It would just be erased and my brain would be blank and I would have to start all over and I didn't have the connections. Really hard to explain. But there were a million disconnections, little pieces and fragments of information, but no connections for me. It was like I didn't know the English language anymore, but I did. And that was the effect of the traumatic brain injury. I couldn't speak. And I knew that I used to know a lot of things that I didn't know anymore. And I was terrified because I was back in this physical world and I knew what was waiting for me at home. And I couldn't be at such a disadvantage and be that vulnerable. I had to know, I had to be wise, and I had to be fast to survive if I was going to go back to the house I lived in, which I was, because that's where my brother was. So I was in second grade in Seattle Children's Hospital, and I was terrified because I had to learn and I had to get with the program quick so I could get back to him and we could get back with the business of surviving. So then we could thrive one day and get the heck out of Dodge. So I learned the power of repetition. I had to relearn everything and I had to learn new ways to learn and repeat a million times. If you think about the average person might take 3 to 7 times to look at something to get it memorized. For me, it was 700 times or 700,000 times. Eventually it sunk in. We're talking basic stuff. And I was rolling up my sleeves and working my tail off every day with basic information. I was determined to get back home. And I did. I went to my grandparents' house in Normandy Park outside of Seattle, outside of Berrien area, and went to Mar Vista Elementary School, which is the Orcas. That school is still there, and the mascot is still the Orcas. And I started second grade at Mar Vista. I don't know, mid 3/4 of the way through the year, I guess. I don't know. I don't remember that. I just remember I had a lot to learn. And repetition was my new best friend. I remember sitting even in the regular school classroom in second grade, knowing that I was way behind everybody else. And I could see the teacher talking and I could hear sentences, but the comprehension still wasn't there. But I was acting like it was, and I was memorizing things because I wasn't going to have anybody put me back in the hospital away from my brother or somewhere else, or move me back into first grade or something. So I was high stress in second grade with my TBI, and I had these huge headbands because I had, half a head of hair and a huge dent in my head, which is almost gone. I can feel it, but you can't really see it anymore. My son, who has a very big scar from his cochlear implant, sports his scars. And so I decided I'm going to part my hair any way I want, even though I might have a huge, or I used to be huge, smaller dent in my head. And it doesn't matter if anybody sees it anymore. And my son inspired me to do that. So there's a little bit of sidebar celebration on sporting the scars, invisible and visible. And so I was relearning, working hard, and repetition and rhythm. I started to, as I was working to repeat things, the repetition of repeating the words or the numbers or whatever it was would create a rhythm. It's kind of this natural rhythm of repetition. And to this day, I can list all the prepositions because I remember the rhythm at which I was memorizing the prepositions. And I learned the power of repetition and rhythm and the movement of that in the mind. And even kind of, I talk a lot. I mean, I do talk a lot, but I move my hands a lot. I move a lot when I talk. And that's part of the rhythm of remembering things. I often close my eyes as well because I visualize, kind of like when I was in the coma. I would definitely, my eyes were closed in the coma, but and I couldn't see and I couldn't connect with the outside world, but I would visualize a lot of things in my mind in the coma. And I still do that to this day. So a lot of times when I'm trying to remember something or I'm thinking about something, even if I'm creatively thinking about something, a lot of times I'll close my eyes to find that information that I know is there. If I can kind of visualize it in my mind's eye, I can maybe get it back. So let's see if I can. Usually I do it, so let's see if I can do it, on camera, but I'm going to close my eyes, list all the prepositions. Remember, prepositions are placement, so placement of things. I used to love doing prepositional phrases, when you would diagram all the sentences out and take out the prepositional phrase, which if you take out a prepositional phrase, the sentence still makes sense because you don't need the prepositional phrase for the sentence to be a complete sentence. I really fell in love with words too, because I was focusing on words and thinking a lot and patterns. So, okay, here we go with the prepositions. Let's see. Okay. Aboard, about, above, across, after, against, along, amid, among, around, at, before, behind, below, beneath, beside, between, beyond, but by, down, during, except for, from, like, near, of, off, on, over, past, since, through, throughout, to, toward, under, underneath, until, unto, with, without. There's the prepositions that I remember memorizing those in elementary school. And as I was saying it, there was kind of a rhythm to it. It's not like some fabulous song that we want to put music to, but there's a rhythm in the repetition that would get created. And that's essentially how I learned. So, and that's still how I learn to this day and how I remember things. It's a really powerful thing. So I learned this, at 7 after the traumatic brain injury, after the coma, and having to relearn everything. I memorized repetition and it would create a rhythm. And so that became, I guess you could say, my superpower back then, and still to this day. So I did make it to high school graduation and followed my brother into the U.S. military. He joined the Army. I joined the Air Force. My Uncle Wilsey is in heaven now. You never say was a Marine, but since he's no longer on this physical earth, he was a Marine on earth. Wonder what he's doing in heaven. But my Uncle Wilsey was a Marine, and I had a great aunt who served in the Navy. And so we have military service members and who have served in our family. And so I joined the Air Force because I didn't want anything to do with the water, and I knew I wasn't Marine material. I knew I wasn't 11 Bravo or airborne material. No thank you. Bahua to my husband, who's a Ranger, and anybody who does all that amazing stuff in service to our country. So I joined the Air Force and loved especially the connection, the rhythm, the movement, marching. I mean, I miss marching because one of the things I miss about marching, and I did cheerleading in high school, there was rhythm and dance and making up routines. And so that movement and rhythm and memorizing the moves with cheerleading in high school, I literally went from pom-poms to an M16. So I went from cheerleading to the Air Force and boot camp, and the rhythm of marching, the esprit de corps, the connection. Other than my brother has always been like my family, because we didn't have parents around protecting us, defending us, teaching us. A lot of times we ended up with our grandparents back and forth when our mom was in jail or missing or what have you. And so we won't go into all that right now, but often ended up with our grandparents. Thank God we didn't get separated and put in different places in foster care. So I am thankful to my grandparents for that. So thankful, because I was able to be with my brother at all times. And my brother is my family. I've got an uncle, Uncle Jim and Aunt Friday, who would come around sometimes, and they're good people and still alive to this day. They were kind. They were consistent in their kindness, And no wonder they didn't come around that often, because there was a lot of chaos and stuff going on that wasn't healthy um, in regard to where I grew up. So when I joined the military, it's like I had a family. I had somewhere to belong. I had a mission bigger than myself. And of course, my brother, he's a year older, a year and a half older than me. He joined the Army and left. I finished high school, joined the Air Force and left, copying my brother. Thank God he was a good role model, because I copied my brother, except to join the Air Force, not the Army. And it was as if I had, hundreds, thousands of sisters and brothers now in the U.S. military. And I still feel that way today. I love service members and veterans and their families with all my heart, as if they are my sisters and brothers. And so from the relationship with my brother to the relationship with sisters and brothers in the U.S. military, and the love of the repetition and the movement and a mission bigger than myself, I was absolutely, absolutely, absolutely in love with that. Um, it was the best feeling to be surrounded by sisters and brothers marching, knowing that my entire 360 was covered. My six was covered, and I was covering others. And so I love that about the U.S. military. When I got out, I missed that and experienced like a disconnect. Fortunately, I had and still do have a very strong connection with my brother. And then I met my husband. I actually met my husband at 17 years old with braces at a phone booth before I left for the Air Force. And very thankful that God brought him into my life. We've been married 32 years now, been with my husband for 33 years. And the connection was instant when I saw him. And I remember the first sentence he said was, I don't even remember what the question was, but his answer was, "I believe so." And he said it with a Southern accent. He's from Georgia. And it was love at first sight for me. And he respected my grandfather. When he wasn't deployed or in the field, he would drive down from Fort Lewis to my grandparents' house in Montesano, Washington, and do the yard work for my grandfather. And my grandfather liked him. My then boyfriend, now husband, Brian, would stand up when my grandfather walked into the room, and he had huge respect for my grandfather, and my grandfather did for him as well. So thankfully, I met my husband at 17 with braces in a phone booth before I even left for the military. I remember my boyfriend then, husband now, telling me, "No offense, but you don't seem like military material," because I literally had just graduated high school and was a cheerleader in high school. And I said, "Well, I got to do what I got to do." My mom was married to a Coke dealer at the time. I moved out of my grandparents' house at 14 and made them take rent from me because I didn't want to be a mooch, to cover food and electricity and whatever I might have utilized at their house. I didn't want to be a mooch like a lot of the family members. And I was determined to leave, even though I really was in love with my boyfriend, now husband. But I had to leave because I couldn't not do something because of a boy or a man, as I had seen my mother do my entire life. Unfortunately, struggling with substances and choosing really unhealthy relationships over health and over me and my brothers. And I was determined to not do something or not do something because of a boy or a man. And so I was determined to leave and make a way for myself. And so I did leave, but thankfully I got stationed at McCord Air Force Base. I did have to pull some strings and swap assignments because I was supposed to go to Travis Air Force Base, but I went to McCord Air Force Base because I swapped assignments with a brother in the Air Force. He wanted to go to California where it was warm and didn't want to go to Washington where it was cold. And I wanted to go back to Washington where my boyfriend at the time was stationed in the 2nd Ranger Bat at Fort Lewis. And I made it back, thankfully. The connection with my husband from the get-go, from the moment I heard him say, "I believe so," 33 years later, is strong, and I love him very much. I'm very thankful for him and his consistency of love in my life. So thankfully, I've always had the connection of my brother. I had the connection with God, and then I had the safe connection with my husband. And so these connections kept me stable, kept me from really spiraling. But I missed the military when I got out. I almost rejoined twice because I missed the mission bigger than myself. I missed having all the sisters and brothers. I missed the like-minded mindset. I missed it. I really did. Almost rejoined twice, but didn't. So I missed the rhythm of the military, the esprit de corps, the structure, the patterns, the marching, the mission. I missed it. But I got out of the Air Force in 1995, hit the ground running, going to school, working. I had a 4-month-old infant, my daughter Faith. And then when she was 3 years old, we were blessed with our son Jacob. At 10 months old, we were told that he was profoundly deaf. And this really stopped me on a dime because all of a sudden, silence. I was reconnected with silence again, like in the coma, but different. This was silence in regard to my son, and he couldn't hear me. And I felt this major disconnect and this barrier with the spiritual and the physical. But I reminded myself about the power of the spiritual connection that, and I realized, like a capital letter knowing, we don't need ears to hear God, and that God isn't bound by the physical. He wasn't bound by the physical when I was in the coma. He's not bound by the physical limitations of deafness. And so I began asking God to speak to Jacob and to teach him and tell him things that, that's a bird, that his dad has a hammer. Those are nails. His sister's going to get a doll. That's a puppy. That's a dandelion. Like every little thing that I saw, I would pray that God would tell Jacob what it is. I remember taking Jacob on a walk, just being very distraught about the fact that he was profoundly deaf and couldn't hear me. Because while I was seeking God and trying to be strong, I was also equally and simultaneously devastated and heartbroken that my son couldn't hear. And as I was asking God to tell him things and teach him things, I was also asking God to give me strength to withstand the barriers of the physical reality of deafness. And I remember taking him on a walk one day, and I was listening to some music, and then I got sad that my son couldn't hear the music. And this huge wind gust started going through the trees. And the sound that trees make is, when wind is just going through them powerfully, it sounds like waves on the ocean shore. And so I was stopped in my tracks with that sound, and I asked God to allow Jacob to hear heavenly sounds, to hear the powerful sounds of the rush of the wind and the rhythm of the swaying back and forth of the wind, and to put the heavenly sounds to it. And Jacob started, like, I call it juking. He started like moving and as if he was dancing in his stroller, like sitting there doing, movements with his upper body. And it was as if he could hear way more than what I was hearing in the moment. And all I can share is my experience. And that was my experience. And so I had hope in the midst of profound deafness. I was moving towards the profound hope of God and the fact that he wasn't bound by deafness. I was still equally sad about it, but I had hope about it. So it's both at the same time, kind of bittersweet type things to get me through. And I was dealing again with the sound of silence that, is deafeningly loud when there are the limitations of physical barriers of deafness. It is a deafeningly loud thing to the heart, at least. We learned about a cochlear implant, and we were prayerful that Jacob could get the cochlear implant. You have to have a intact or formed cochlea for the equipment to kind of wrap around to hold the equipment. You also have to have auditory nerves that are not damaged. And so he did pass those tests to qualify to get the cochlear implant. Cochlear implant is electrodes and silicone tubing wound around the cochlea and then connected to the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve receives all the codes taken in from the cochlear implant and then sends it to the brain. We hear electrically, neurochemically, electrically. And so the cochlear implant mimics our natural hearing process. And as long as the auditory nerves are intact and work, the cochlear implant more than likely should work. So Jacob received a cochlear implant in 2000. Back in 2000, the earliest infant child could get an implant was 18 months. Now they're doing it as early as 3, 6, 9 months. But in 2000, the earliest a child in the United States could get one was 18 months. And so from 10 months to 18 months, we had 8 months of knowing he was profoundly deaf, not having any sound. What do we do for communication? And, he started speech therapy, which might sound odd that he was profoundly deaf and started speech therapy. But here's what's really interesting. He went to the Atlanta Speech School. They used the power of vibrations to teach him to pay attention to face. So one's face or mouth moving, to sit still, even though he didn't hear anything. So they strapped this thing across his chest, and it had a microphone on it, and it would vibrate to whatever the sounds was coming into the microphone. So he would learn that when someone's mouth was moving, he would feel this vibration on his chest. So speech therapy started with the power of vibrations, the power of paying attention to a face, the power of sitting still and responding to the vibrations, which I thought was absolutely profound, to use the word from profound deafness. I thought it was profound. I also started praying to God that he would give me things to teach Jacob, that he would teach me and tell me things that there's no way I could know to do to be able to help my son. I remember teaching Jacob concepts of cold and warm. You don't have to have language to learn concepts. And so I woke up one morning and knew that I was supposed to put ice cubes in a bowl for cold. And I turned on the oven, which you could put your hand on, and it was warm. Warm is kind of it's not very accentuated with the mouth. Warm. I don't know. For some reason, I thought hot was more accentuated of a word. So I taught him hot, and I taught him cold. And we were holding ice cubes. Now, granted, he was like 10, 11 months old. He thought it was hilarious, and he was just throwing ice cubes across the kitchen floor. I felt the word I don't use, but I felt stupid, silly. What am I doing? He can't hear me. He's just throwing ice cubes all over the place. Like, this is silly. The doubt or fear of this isn't going to work. Who do you think you are? What are you doing? Was kind of coming at me. And I'm like, no. I know. I woke up and I had a capital letter knowing that I knew that I needed to teach him the concept of cold and hot. So I knew I had to stay grounded and do what I knew to do. Capital letter, what I knew to do. Capital letter knowing. So did this over and over again. He thought it was fun. He thought it was a new game we were playing. Well, I don't know how many days or a week or two later, we weren't doing the ice cubes in the hot lesson because we had to get ready, get in Atlanta traffic. He had an appointment we had to get to. I remember it was winter because it was cold out. And of course, the ice cubes were cold. And guess what? This is back in the day before there were wipe warmers. So all the wipes were cold. I remember, typically I would try to warm the wipes in my hand before I wiped him and changed his diaper. But this particular morning I was in a hurry. We had to get going, and I was changing his diaper. I used the wipe, and he literally did both hands like this and said, "Oh." He was saying cold. This was holding the ice cubes, and he did, "Oh," like that, which makes, cold. That's the sound that comes out when you, "Oh." So, and that's the vibration of oh, oh, you can feel oh, but it was with the ice cubes. So Jacob was, let's just say he was 11 months old. He said his first word, which was cold, based on the concepts that he learned from cold, holding ice cubes, and hot. I had profound hope at that point. I mean, it was like, this is working. He can learn things despite the barriers of physical deafness. I prayed that he could hear God. I knew from my experience in the coma that God is not bound by the physical. I remembered that, which gave me profound hope for my own traumatic brain injury, my own challenges. And as a parent now with a son who we were bound by the physical, but God wasn't. And then God helped us helped us transcend beyond physical limitations to grow and learn and thrive in the midst of deafness. Before he got his cochlear implant, he said his first word, which was cold. So I'm kind of integrating silence, vibrations, the power of vibrations. This is also for me about the power of prayer and perseverance and faith too. So moving through profound deafness, with a lot of pain and a lot of hope at the same time, not just pain, not just hope, but like in equal measure that kind of pierced my heart on a consistent basis, and sometimes still does. We made it through as a family. There were more things that would come and hit us and hit me, trauma and things. And as a clinical psychologist who works with service members and veterans recovering from post-traumatic stress, recovering from trauma, and I've been doing this for about 10 years, and 10 years were at the facility I'm at, working with service members and veterans. I have recently, the last year, really gotten into the power of music. I started reading research and seeing what are the benefits of music. And I have been reminded about the power of repetition, the power of vibrations, the power of movement. And I just want to touch on a couple of things that music does. Music, when we hear, so music goes in through the ear, the cilia in the inner ear, the proteins on the end of each cilia receive it, code it, and that code jumps across the synapse all the way down to the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve receives the coding, sends it to the brain, and we hear. Now, this is how we naturally hear neuroelectrochemically. The cochlear implant mimics that, does the same thing, sends it to the auditory nerve, and then we have these codes that are sent neuroelectrochemically through the brain, and we hear, and the body responds. Body responds first, really, with the coding it and traveling over the synapses to the auditory nerve. That's vibration. We hear with vibration. So never mind the cochlear implant, but when we hear, music goes in, the body responds to the music. So music is like the fingers on the piano. The cells, our cells are the piano keys. The music comes in, the cells receive it, and the cells respond to the music at the same rate and rhythm and vibration as the music. So if it's high-paced, fast music, the cells are mimicking it. If it's slower pace, the cells are mimicking it. So literally, music influences us physiologically in a powerful way, causes cells to move. Music activates premotor neurons. Premotor, before we even get to the motor neurons, it activates premotor neurons that begin to create this momentum, the intensity, and then motor neurons, and then movement. This is why we can't not move when we hear a song. You listen to music long enough, you're going to move a little. You're going to sway a little. You're going to start to move a little, because even infants as young as 3 months old, they start to move their head, their neck, their limbs, their torso. Different types of music can influence different areas, and certain types of music can influence all areas. For a 3-month-old baby, we get movement. So I say, if we're doing physical therapy, why are we not, or maybe we are, I haven't seen it, I need to look in the research. Why are we not doing specific music for physical therapy? Maybe we are. I need to look at the research. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it done at the hospitals I've been at. Even when I did my own physical therapy after joint replacements, titanium, and all kinds of rehab and things, I would be at a physical therapy facility and there would be like whatever music on the radio playing and maybe 6 of us in the room working with physical therapists. But the music was just half the time it gave me a headache. I didn't like it. And it wasn't specific to the therapy I was doing. How powerful would it be if we had music specific to the types of movement or the speed of movement, or just music that the individual likes? Listening to that to activate premotor neurons and motor neurons for healing and strength and recovery. Something to think about, something I need to look into in the research. But music is powerful. It causes us to move. Vibrations. The body receives the vibrations, the rhythm. And it helped me in a coma. The vibrations, the movement of thinking, of movement, of connection. And yes, I'm going to give credit to God. That's my belief system. That's my faith. And I wouldn't be here, my belief, 100%. If God hadn't given me the opportunity to come back, and if God hadn't connected my brain and body, and also if I hadn't also wanted to connect them both and come back, because I knew I could have chosen to go home and have peace forever and not deal with the pain of life. But I wanted to be with my brother more than I wanted the peace of eternity at the time at 7 years old. And thankfully I was able, God allowed me, and my brain and body reconnected. But I was literally in the coma, thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking, trying to create that momentum, that rhythm, that intensity for the connection to happen, which I knew God had to do for me to get back. But then the rhythm of repetition and relearning and learning and repetition and learning the power of kind of the rhythm of repetition so that I could memorize things and stay in 2nd grade, move to 3rd grade, etc. Learning has always been very hard for me. To this day, I have to have visual things. If I try to only visualize, only visualize without repetition, it's like the chalkboard or the white erase board keeps getting erased. I get halfway there and then it all disappears. That's what happens to me. If I've written it down like 700 times, it creates a long-term memory of a visual in my mind that I can pull from, but it takes repetition like 700 times. I know that they say the average studying for boards to pass the clinical psychology licensing board, average number of hours is 200. I knew I needed to spend 2,000 if I was going to pass that exam, and I did. 2,000 plus probably. And by the grace of God, I did pass it. But I did study 2,000 versus 200 hours. And that's always how it's been for me. But the power of repetition, it gets ingrained in my brain, and I have a visual to pull from because of the repetition. That's how it gets there. And that repetition creates a rhythm. So then joining the military, I loved the rhythm of the military. I loved marching. I loved the movement, the esprit de corps, the rhythm of the mission. Loved it. It just like sang to me as far as purpose and meaning, and still does to this day. And I love service members and veterans. Getting out of the military, hitting the ground running, and then having my son, who I was told was profoundly deaf, stop me on a dime, because all of a sudden my rhythm, it's like I had whiplash from the sound of silence and the obstacle of silence. But then I had the hope and remembered how I wasn't bound. God is not bound by the physical. I was bound by the physical when I was stuck in my coma. But God helped me traverse through that. And then God could help me traverse through that in regard to my son and deafness. We didn't have to be 100% bound and hopeless in deafness. We could have profound hope and traverse through the obstacles of the deafeningly loud silence of deafness. And God helped us do that. And yes, it was a lot of work of asking God for lessons to teach my son before he could hear. And it was a lot of work. Cochlear implant is the first step. It takes countless hours and years to implement the implant. And that takes repetition, 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 starting with vibrations, repetition, repetition, repetition. And eventually we get new patterns and we get connection and we get somewhere with it. And just so you know, my son is 25. He has 2 cochlear implants now. The one that he first got works really well and he can hear. The second implant he got a couple years ago, the irritating sound that was always there when it got turned on is now down, but he can't use just that implant and understand language or anything or hear. So that's going to continue to take a lot more work and repetition for the brain, that side of, or those auditory nerves to make the connections for comprehension, understanding, and speech or comprehension. He can speak. He's developed that ability. He can talk to us when he doesn't have either cochlear implant on. He might talk a little louder than he normally does with the right cochlear implant on, but I'm going down a rabbit hole on that, but it's fascinating to me about the power of vibrations, the power of repetition. When you think about recovery in general, when you add rhythm, when you add repetition, which we find in music, we can get some amazing benefits. Music has the ability to cause the cells to move, the body to move. It helps the mind and body access emotions it otherwise wouldn't access, and to process various emotions for grief, loss, healing, connections. It can even, depending on the kind of music we're listening to, upbeat music can uplift our mood and cause us to move, towards hope and healing and happiness and relief. It can give us some relief from the heaviness of sadness, but music also helps us process the heaviness of sadness. If you've ever had a time where you can't stop crying, or you can't cry if your life depended on you, but you want to because it's a sad thing and everyone else has a tear and you don't have a tear, and why don't you have a tear? And you feel kind of stopped up with the emotions that aren't flowing, but you can't get to them because they're so stuffed down from trauma, from the intensity of life and things. I've been there. Music can help us, help the body, help the brain and body begin to move and process emotions, even if we don't know their names. It can bring us some emotional relief and release. So music is a powerful thing. It can help us transcend space and time. It can bring us to a place that we'd like to visit from enjoyable memories. You listen to a song and all of a sudden you're transported to that time and place. I know when I listen to Hank Williams Jr., I'm at a bonfire in high school, or I'm driving in a truck on dirt roads. Randy Travis, George Strait, Clint Black, Reba McEntire, Dolly Parton, Charlie Daniels Band. I mean, these Alabama, so all these country music singers, bands, I'm transported in space and time when I hear that stuff, and it makes me really, really happy, right? So music can help us. It's a bridge between space and time. It can bring us out of difficult times for a moment. We can get some relief from the heaviness of things. It can uplift mood. Music is a powerful thing for healing. One of the things I teach my service members and veterans is I have them listen to music. I tell them to listen to music to enter new territory, because music helps us engage in new territory. So if you listen to a song, You listen to a song, the music can surprise and delight us because the singer might do something with their voice. There might be a guitar, the whine of a guitar or drums. And so we hold our breath in anticipation. And then we are, excited and delighted and amazed at what the music does. And we feel it physically. We also feel it emotionally. And as we are engaging in this unknown territory of the song, it's helping us engage in new territory, period. So instead of being stuck in survival mode, in survival territory type thinking, when we're in thriving territory, we don't want to be stuck in survival mode in thriving territory. So how can we begin to ease our way into a thriving mindset? We can listen to music, because music helps the brain and body make connections and process things and heal. It also helps activate the prefrontal cortex for executive functioning, organizing, and planning, and prediction to expect thriving things. So unknown doesn't have to be terrifying. Unknown can be exciting and delightful via the vehicle of music. So how'd I do talking about music, the healing benefits of music, traumatic brain injury, repetition, relearning, rhythm, the military, profound deafness, and healing in general from being, for example, stuck in survival mode and trying to engage in thriving mode in our day-to-day life. I hope I did it justice. I did tell some stories, and I hope you enjoyed those. I hope you know that, I am over here. I am a work in progress, and I do have definite, profound hope. I have been in places that I was, profoundly stuck with the obstacles of the physical realities of things. And I have moved through those, and I continue to move through those. I still deal with the effects of the traumatic brain injury, but the repetition and the rhythm found in learning and repetition, the repetition and learning creates a rhythm that then helps me continue to learn and move towards growth and progress. And I have used that throughout my entire life. The benefits of rhythm. It's a powerful thing, rhythm and connection. And we don't have to be bound by a traumatic brain injury. We don't have to be bound by deafness. And we don't have to be bound by survival mode. We can engage in the repetition that creates rhythm for thriving. And why not? Please do use music to thrive. So stay alert, stay alive, and thrive, because the training and the music and the connections does continue. And I'll see you soon.